I brought in a $500,000 client. My VP said, "Let's put a man in the meeting. They don't trust soft voices." He gave my project to his golf buddy. So I emailed the client with a simple question: "Would you still want the deal if you knew who did the work?" Their reply was one sentence: "Now the VP's fired. But he's about to find out who filed the SEC complaint signed as." I don't talk much at work. I don't like small talk, and I've never been the one who laughs the loudest in meetings or throws out empty buzzwords just to be heard. I just do the work. I'm good at it, and I thought that would be enough. I was part of a mid-sized consulting firm. Nothing fancy, but we had a few Fortune 500 clients and a couple of rising stars on our books. I'd been there almost 6 years. I started out as a research analyst and worked my way up to leading projects. Quietly. Steadily. For months ago, I pulled in a client worth $500,000. It was a startup that had recently received major funding. I had been following them for a while, and I knew they'd need long-term strategic help. I made the first contact. I built the relationship. I stayed up late writing proposals, running numbers, creating custom analysis models just for them. They weren't even in our pipeline until I brought them in. And when they finally agreed to sign, I thought I'd finally earned some real respect. I told my VP during our weekly review that the deal was ready to close. His first reaction wasn't, "Great job." It was, "They'll want someone stronger in the room for the signing." When I asked what he meant, he said, "You're smart, but your voice doesn't carry authority. Let's put a man in the meeting. Optics matter." I didn't argue. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, he said he'd bring in Greg. Greg is his friend. They golf on weekends. Greg barely shows up to work before 10 a.m. and can't finish a PowerPoint deck without help. He wasn't part of the project. He didn't know the client. But suddenly, he was co-leading the deal. My name wasn't even on the internal announcement. I found out the meeting was scheduled without me. When I emailed to ask if I'd be attending, I got no reply. So I waited. I kept my head down and waited for the contract to come back. When it did, Greg's name was on the closing notes. He was listed as the lead consultant, and I was listed nowhere. I felt sick. For months of work, dozens of late nights, strategy sessions, research, calls, all just erased. My performance review was coming up in 6 weeks, and I knew how this would be framed. Greg brought in the biggest client of the quarter. So I took a deep breath and I wrote one email. It was short. I sent it directly to the client COO, the one I'd been talking to for months. I just wrote, "Would you still want this deal if you knew who actually did the work?" That was it. I didn't say anything else. No accusations. No attachments. Just that question. 2 days later, our entire floor got an email from HR. Greg had been placed on temporary leave. The VP was transitioning out immediately. My manager told me to meet with the managing partner one-on-one that afternoon. Apparently, the COO had forwarded my message to their CEO, who personally called our firm. They weren't just mad. They were furious. They threatened to cancel the entire contract if I wasn't reinstated as lead. Not Greg. Not the VP. The deal stayed, but only if I ran it. Greg was gone the next week. The VP left under mutual agreement. Everyone assumed that was the end of it. But I saw something else, something no one else noticed. When I was going through the internal project files, I found a version of the proposal Greg had sent to the client. It wasn't just my work. It was word for word my internal draft, the one I never sent externally. The numbers, the charts, the language, I recognized every piece of it. Down to a typo I had fixed later but hadn't corrected in that version, which meant someone had accessed my private folder. I checked the version history. It had been downloaded using an admin override account, one only a few people had access to. And the timestamp? 2:13 a.m., the night before Greg's co-lead role was announced. That's when I knew. The VP didn't just take credit. He went into my private files, gave them to Greg, and passed it off as their work. And I knew exactly what that meant. Because we're not just a consulting firm, we're SEC registered. Which means passing off someone else's work, especially for high-value proposals tied to investor funding, isn't just unethical. It's potentially illegal. So I documented everything. Every access log, every file version, every internal message. And then I filed a formal complaint with the SEC. I used the anonymous whistleblower portal. I signed it under a name they wouldn't recognize. But it's not over yet, because I've just been contacted by a compliance officer from our legal department. They want to know what I saw. And the VP? He's about to find out that being fired was the least of his problems. The compliance officer set up a meeting with me in one of the small glass conference rooms. She was calm, polite, but I could tell right away she already knew more than she was saying. She slid a paper across the table. It was a list of usernames and file access logs. My name wasn't on it, but the VP's was. And Greg's. She asked me simple questions. Had I shared my internal draft with anyone? Did I know who else had access to my folder? Was I aware of any other projects where something like this happened? I told her the truth. I only kept that draft in my personal folder because it wasn't ready. No one else should have had it. Then she asked something I didn't expect. Were you aware this proposal was also submitted to a different firm before it was brought back in-house? I felt my stomach drop. Apparently, Greg and the VP had sent my exact proposal, my numbers, my strategies, to one of our competitors under a fake consulting shell company registered just 6 weeks earlier. That company had tried to bid for the client before our firm closed the deal. The client chose us instead because of the relationship I built. But now that compliance was involved, it wasn't just about stolen work. It was fraud, collusion, conflict of interest, and possibly insider misuse of client information. The legal team opened a full investigation. Suddenly, people I'd never spoken to started treating me like I was radioactive. HR stopped replying to my messages. I wasn't invited to team meetings. My own manager told me to take some time off until things settled. I wasn't suspended, but I might as well have been. Greg deleted his LinkedIn profile. The VP's name disappeared from the company website. Someone wiped his office clean overnight. Still, no one told me anything. One night, about 2 weeks after I spoke to compliance, I got a phone call. It was blocked, but I answered. A man's voice. Low. Nervous. He said, "You think you know what's going on, but you don't. You need to stop digging." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone. My heart was racing. I wasn't even sure it was Greg or the VP, but who else would call me like that? The next morning, I walked into my apartment lobby and saw the building manager waiting. Someone had keyed my car in the garage. Deep lines all across the driver's side. No cameras in that part of the building. I filed a police report. They couldn't do anything. A week later, my building got a noise complaint about me. Then another. I don't even play music. One of them said I was screaming threats out the window. It was ridiculous, but it was enough to get a warning from the landlord. I knew what this was. They were trying to scare me, push me out, shut me up. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, I got a call from my bank. Someone tried to reset my online account. They had my full name, address, and the last 4 digits of my SSN. That's when I knew someone was using company records to go after me. I called the SEC hotline again. I gave them every detail. I asked if I could update my complaint with the harassment. They told me I could. And that's when something shifted. 2 days later, I got an email from an outside law firm. Not ours. Government counsel. They wanted to set up an interview. They didn't just want my side anymore. They were building a case. And I wasn't the only one they'd contacted. Someone else inside the firm had submitted evidence. Someone I didn't know. The VP and Greg had done this before. But this time they picked the wrong target. And I was just getting started. The outside law firm set up a video call with me. They were calm, professional, but their questions were sharper than anything compliance asked. They already had documents I'd never seen. Wire transfers, emails, screenshots of text messages. Some of them had my proposal attached, sent from the VP's personal Gmail to someone with a different domain name I didn't recognize. When I asked who it was, they didn't answer. They just said, "We'll circle back." After the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than I thought. A week later, I found out why. The other anonymous whistleblower finally came forward. It was a director from finance. She asked to meet me in person at a coffee shop away from the office. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She told me the VP had been moving money quietly through shell companies for at least a year. Greg wasn't just his golf buddy, he was listed as a co-owner on two of them. And one of the shell companies? The same one that tried to bid for my client. It wasn't just about stealing my work. They were setting up an entire side business, siphoning clients and money while still working inside our firm. And because our company was SEC registered, that meant federal violations. But then she told me something else that made my blood run cold. She said the VP had mentioned my name in a meeting with her once, months earlier. He called me useful but disposable. He bragged that people like me did the grunt work and people like him turned it into profit. He laughed about it. That was when I realized I was never supposed to get credit. I was supposed to be invisible. Until I made myself seen. The investigation dragged on for weeks. HR avoided me. My manager barely looked me in the eye. Word spread that I was the reason the firm was under federal review. A few coworkers stopped talking to me altogether. I'd walk into the break room, and conversations would die instantly. The isolation was suffocating. Then the client called me directly. They'd been contacted by someone claiming I was unstable and not to be trusted. They didn't believe it, but they thought I should know. I asked who contacted them. They said it was from an anonymous number, but the person used my full middle name, which almost no one at work knew. That same night, my apartment buzzer rang at midnight. No one was there when I looked out, but my stomach told me it wasn't random. The next day, the outside law firm reached out again. They told me I should consider personal legal counsel because if I was being targeted, it might escalate. They said federal investigators were taking the case seriously. Their tone was different this time. Heavier. 2 days later, I learned the biggest twist yet. The finance director, the other whistleblower, suddenly went on leave. But she didn't tell me. Her email auto-reply just said she was gone indefinitely. Then I got a message from a blocked account with a single line, "You don't know who you're really dealing with." I didn't sleep that night. And for the first time, I wondered if this wasn't just about corporate fraud anymore. Maybe the VP and Greg had ties outside the firm. Maybe they weren't working alone. Because how else did they get my SSN? And why did it feel like someone was watching me every step I took? The stress started eating at me. I stopped going into the office. I worked from home with my blinds closed. I checked my locks twice before bed. My phone rang with unknown numbers almost every day, and every time I answered, the line was silent. I started saving everything. Every call log. Every screenshot. Every piece of mail. I bought an external drive and kept copies off my laptop. If they wanted to scare me, I wasn't going to let them erase me. Then one afternoon, I got an email from the SEC investigators. They had subpoenaed internal firm records. What they found shocked me. There were multiple proposals, nearly identical to mine, that had been funneled out to shell companies over the last year. At least 3 major deals were compromised. And in each case, the VP and Greg were somehow attached to the outside bidder. But here was the twist. In one of the files, my name was listed as a consultant for one of their fake companies. A forged signature. Fake email address. A resume copied from my LinkedIn. They had been using me as cover. If anyone looked closely, it would seem like I was moonlighting for their shell company. I felt my stomach drop. If I hadn't spoken up, if I hadn't sent that one email to the client, I could have been the one blamed when this all exploded. The outside law firm asked if I wanted federal protection as a cooperating witness. That's when I realized just how deep this was. Meanwhile, my coworkers started whispering louder. Some thought I was the leak that ruined the firm. Others thought I was working with the VP and cut a deal. No one said it to my face, but the stares told me enough. I was alone in my own workplace. Then the finance director reached out again, through a burner email. She said she wasn't on leave. She was hiding. Someone had shown up near her house late at night, same as what happened to me. She didn't feel safe. She warned me to be careful who I trusted, even inside the firm. I asked her why she came forward, if she knew the risks. She wrote back, "Because they've done worse than just steal money." She didn't explain. But the next day, the SEC called me again. They said they uncovered evidence that the VP's shell companies weren't just stealing contracts. They were laundering money. And some of that money traced back to a private investment group overseas. Suddenly, this wasn't just corporate fraud anymore. This was organized crime. And the VP? He wasn't just a smug executive. He was a front man. And somehow, without meaning to, I had just pulled the thread that could unravel the whole thing. The investigators moved fast once the organized crime angle surfaced. Suddenly, everything that had felt slow and hidden started snapping into place. Federal agents raided the firm one morning. People said they showed up in dark jackets, walked straight past reception, and went into the VP's old office. By noon, everyone knew. Word spread through whispers and emails, subpoenas, seized laptops, records locked down.
The VP didn't show up that day. Neither did Greg.
A week later, news broke. Both of them had been arrested. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. It was all there. Their shell companies were named in the indictment. The fake consulting bids, the offshore transfers. And buried in the middle of the filing was the part that made my chest tighten. They had used employee identities, including mine, to make the whole scheme look legitimate. I wasn't a bystander. I had been one of their shields. The finance director and I were called in as key witnesses. Our names weren't public yet, but inside the firm, everyone knew. The whispers turned into apologies. People who had ignored me suddenly wanted to sit with me at lunch, send me long messages about how brave I was. I didn't answer most of them. The client I saved sent me a handwritten letter. They said they admired my courage and that they were staying with our firm because of me. They even offered me a job directly if I ever wanted to leave. But revenge wasn't about job offers or pity. It came later, in court. I sat there in the gallery when the VP stood in front of the judge. He looked smaller than I remembered. No smug grin. No golf tan. Just a tired, bitter man in a suit that no longer fit. Greg looked worse, red-eyed, shifting constantly, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The prosecutor laid it all out. Years of siphoning client work. Millions laundered through shell accounts. And then the part that made me clench my fists, the evidence showing how they stole my proposal, word for word. The judge read the sentence slowly. The VP got 12 years. Greg got 7. Both were fined more than they would ever pay back. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of their families crying. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just felt a weight slide off my chest. Afterward, the finance director hugged me in the hallway. She whispered, "We're free now." But here's the part one never told anyone. The SEC gave me a whistleblower award. Quietly, discreetly. A percentage of the money recovered. It was more than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to pay off my student loans. Enough to buy a home. Enough to finally walk away. And I did. I left the firm a month later. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk in silence. No goodbye party. No fake smiles. Just me and a box of files. I never told anyone about the award. Not my coworkers. Not even my family. I just kept it close, like a secret shield. The VP thought I was disposable. Greg thought I was invisible. But in the end, it was my voice, the quiet one, that destroyed them. And that one email I sent, it didn't just save the client. It ended their careers, exposed their crimes, and gave me the kind of freedom they could never buy. That was my revenge. And it was enough.